"He isn't my standard for a partner," said his ego, until he realized I was the only one who. The air in the grand ballroom of the Sinclair Hotel was thick with the scent of lilies, polished mahogany, and the intoxicating perfume of success. Crystal chandeliers, hanging like frozen, inverted waterfalls, cast a soft, celebratory glow over the 100 or so guests. This was the annual corporate gala for Summit Global Consulting, and tonight, the golden spotlight belonged unequivocally to Chloe. My name is William, and for the past 7 years, I've been Chloe's husband, a constant fixture in the background of her glittering ascent. Chloe, Chloe. To an outsider, she was a statue carved from ambition and draped in confidence. Tonight, she wore a deep emerald gown that seemed to absorb and re-radiate the room's light. She was tall, impeccably poised, with sharp, intelligent eyes that never missed a strategic move. Her career trajectory wasn't a climb, it was a rocket launch. She had just closed the biggest merger deal in her firm's history, a fact that was being toasted with alarming frequency by men in suits that cost more than my first car. I, on the other hand, was the quiet anchor. I ran a small, artisanal woodworking shop, a world of sawdust, sweat, and silence. I was comfortable in flannel and denim, not the borrowed, slightly stiff tuxedo that felt like a cage around my chest. I knew my role tonight: supportive partner, proud smile, and silent spectator. I was the sturdy oak in the backdrop of her tropical orchid display. And usually, I didn't mind. Chloe was currently deep in conversation with Mr. Alastair Finch, the firm's imposing CEO. Her laugh a carefully modulated chime that never quite reached her eyes. I watched her. The precise tilt of her head, the elegant gesture of her hand as she made a point. She was performing, and she was flawless. My attention drifted to the linen tablecloth, tracing the intricate pattern with my index finger, when a waiter stopped beside me, refilling my glass with a sparkling cider I didn't want. I missed her. Not in the physical sense, she was 10 feet away, but the sense of her presence being wholly mine, even in a room full of people. I missed the Chloe who wore oversized sweaters and let me braid her hair while we watched bad reality TV. The professional veneer she wore these days felt less like a shield and more like a permanent skin. I shifted in my seat, catching her eye for a fraction of a second. She gave me a quick, tight-lipped smile, the kind you give a helpful acquaintance, not your life partner. That fleeting, almost dismissive look was a tiny, invisible pinprick to my spirit. The dinner finished, and the main event, Mr. Finch's congratulatory speech, began. The room hushed. I saw my chance. I slid my hand across the slick, cool linen under the table until my fingers brushed hers. It was a simple, affectionate gesture, a quiet connection in the booming public arena, a small attempt to tether us back together. For a moment, her hand lay still beneath mine, warm and familiar. A flicker of hope ignited in my chest, a small pilot light of warmth. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, she began to move her hand. It wasn't a sudden, angry pull. It was a smooth, calculated withdrawal, like a surgeon finishing a delicate cut. Her fingers detached from mine, and her hand retreated back into her lap, out of sight. All this, while her head remained tilted attentively toward Mr. Finch, her face a mask of polite engagement. My hand felt suddenly enormous, heavy, and empty on the table. The warmth had vanished, leaving a cold, creeping numbness behind. When Finch paused for applause, Chloe leaned close to me, her breath smelling of expensive champagne and mint. I braced myself for the apology, the explanation, the private reassurance. "William," she whispered, her voice low and edged with a professional coldness I was beginning to dread. "Please, don't be so excessive in front of people. This is a professional event, and I truly don't like being the center of attention for silly, domestic things." She paused, her eyes briefly meeting mine, and I saw a flash of irritation. Not anger, but genuine annoyance at the misstep I had caused. "People will think I'm not focused on my career. They'll think I'm distracted, that I'm just a wife." Stop. The word stop hit me like a small, sharp pebble. It wasn't the words themselves, as much as the context. My simple need for connection, to feel her skin against mine, to share a moment of private pride, was classified as an excessive, silly, domestic thing. It was a virus she needed to quarantine immediately to protect her immaculate public persona. I pulled my hand fully back, resting it on my knee. The warmth in the room, the flickering candlelight, the celebratory buzz, it all evaporated, replaced by a hollow echo in my chest. I felt my shoulders slump slightly, the borrowed tuxedo feeling tighter and more restrictive than before. I didn't feel rage. Rage would have been easier, cleaner. What I felt was worse: emptiness, smallness. It was the realization that in Chloe's grand, meticulously constructed world, I was a potential liability, an accessory that needed to be kept tucked away in the velvet pouch until the opportune moment for display. And that moment, clearly, was never when my hand reached out in raw, unscripted affection. My mind, usually so active with designs and measurements, went quiet. I watched her nod sincerely at a passing compliment from a junior associate, her smile back in place, bright and impervious. I realized, right there, watching her perform, that the gulf between the public Chloe and the private Chloe was expanding rapidly, becoming a chasm I didn't know how to bridge. I took a slow sip of the flat cider. The music swelled, a generic, triumphant score that matched the mood of everyone in the room except me. My resolve hardened, not with bitterness, but with a weary resignation. I will not try again. I wouldn't risk being branded excessive or silly again. If the price of being her partner was the complete withdrawal of visible affection in public, then I would pay it. I would become the invisible man, the polished piece of furniture that complements the room but never draws focus. Later, as the party began to thin out, the atmosphere shifted from triumphant energy to exhausted politeness. Chloe was exchanging air kisses and firm handshakes with the remaining executives. I stood a few paces back, my face set in the polite, distant smile that was now my default setting for these events. I noticed Mr. Finch giving me a look, a quick, assessing glance that seemed to confirm my secondary status. Chloe finally came over, a faint shadow of fatigue under her perfect makeup. "Ready, Will?" she asked, grabbing her small, diamond-clasped purse. The tone was all business. The meeting was adjourned. "Whenever you are, Chloe," I replied, my voice flat. I resisted the urge to place my hand on the small of her back as we walked toward the cloakroom. The ghost of her previous rebuke was still clinging to the lining of my tuxedo jacket. In the elevator, the silence between us was heavy, palpable, pressing against the glass walls. It wasn't the comfortable silence of two people who know each other so well they don't need words. It was the tense, delicate silence of two people afraid of what the next word might shatter. "You were great tonight, by the way," I offered, trying to inject some warmth into the vacuum. She barely looked at me, focusing instead on smoothing a non-existent crease from her glove. "I know." It was crucial to establish that my personal life is entirely separate. Finch is looking for a new managing partner, and any sign of emotional neediness could be misinterpreted as a lack of ruthlessness. The word neediness hung in the air, a cruel banner fluttering just for my benefit. I realized that my attempt to hold her hand was not just silly to her. It was a sign of weakness, an Achilles heel she refused to expose to the corporate wolves. "Right," I muttered, looking at the ceiling numbers flicker. "Wouldn't want anyone to think you're, a human being." She sighed, a quick, exasperated puff of air. "Don't be dramatic, William. It's called managing your image. It's what separates the successful from the sentimentalists." The elevator dinged, announcing our arrival at the lobby. We walked out into the cool night air, the city noise a welcome distraction from the silent conflict waging between us. As we waited for the valet, I looked at her under the stark streetlights. She was beautiful, successful, and terrifyingly distant. I saw the trophy on the mantel, but the warmth of the hearth was gone. I was beginning to understand that the space she was clearing for her career was, by necessity, the space I used to occupy in her heart. And she didn't seem to notice the cost. We drove home in her sleek black sedan, the leather seats cold against my skin. I stared out the window at the passing city lights, a kaleidoscope of brilliant, fleeting colors. I was lost in thought, detached, already practicing the art of being emotionally absent. The separation had begun, not with a bang of conflict, but with the silent, insidious withdrawal of a hand under a linen tablecloth. It was the first deep cut of the emotional severance that would define the coming months, a silent agreement to let the distance grow, an agreement she had imposed, and one I would, in my wounded pride, uphold. She wanted space. I was learning, meticulously, how to give it to her. This emotional void, this careful detachment, would be the only thing that could survive in the high-altitude atmosphere of Chloe's ambition. And it was exactly this fragile, carefully maintained distance that would later become the very thing that horrified her when she finally saw the warmth I was willing to share with others. 3 weeks bled into 4 since the night of the gala, and the silence had grown wings. It wasn't the absence of noise. Our apartment was often filled with the clatter of our separate, scheduled lives. It was the absence of a shared frequency. Chloe and I were living parallel existences, 2 ships navigating the same dark ocean, their lights barely acknowledging the other's presence. I had become meticulous in maintaining the distance she demanded. I no longer reached for her hand across the dinner table. I no longer leaned in to whisper a ridiculous joke when we were out. I had successfully transformed myself into the unsilly, unexcessive partner, a ghost companion whose love, like a suppressed frequency, was entirely undetectable by others, and increasingly, even by her. And in this vacuum I'd created, a strange, quiet serenity had settled over me. The initial sting of rejection had faded into a dull, manageable ache. I wasn't angry. I was detached. The emotional tether had been snipped, and I was floating freely, albeit directionless. This new dynamic was subtly poisoning the atmosphere. Chloe, the master strategist, seemed simultaneously satisfied and uneasy with the outcome. She had her space, her image was pristine, yet the silence I offered felt heavier than any argument we'd ever had. She'd try little calculated gestures at home, a longer glance, a soft, "How was your shop today?" But they felt like attempts to check the temperature of her controlled environment, not genuine inquiries into my soul. They felt like testing the boundary, and I, the faithful sentinel of her ego, kept the gate locked. The setting for the catalyst was a company team-building retreat, less formal than the gala, held on a breezy Saturday afternoon at an upscale country club, complete with lawn games and a barbecue. Chloe insisted I come. It was a necessary component of the well-rounded, socially integrated partner image, provided I behaved like a respectful, inanimate object. I wore my customary shield, a polite, two-dimensional smile. Chloe, naturally, was networking with the fierce elegance of a bird of prey. She was standing near a cabana, flanked by a group of senior VPs, discussing quarterly projections with rapid-fire clarity. I was positioned strategically by the grill, nursing a bottle of craft beer, perfectly out of range of her professional radar. It was there that Leo found me. Leo, Chloe's close colleague and friend, the character I'd seen her embrace with genuine warmth countless times, was the antithesis of the typical Summit Global suit. He was warm, loud, and utterly without pretense. He approached me with a grin that could melt icebergs, carrying 2 plates laden with grilled food. "William, my man. Don't tell me Chloe's got you cornered into silent observation again," Leo boomed, clapping me warmly on the shoulder. A casual touch that immediately felt foreign and surprisingly pleasant. "Just doing my job, Leo," I replied, managing a small, authentic smile. Blending into the wallpaper. The supporting cast doesn't steal the scene. Leo laughed, a deep, easy sound. "Nonsense. You're the secret sauce, mate. Come on, sit. I need to escape the strategic small talk for 5 minutes. That stuff is draining." We settled onto a pair of wicker chairs under a sprawling oak tree. We talked about anything but work, my woodworking, his disastrous attempts at gardening, the subtle art of brisket seasoning. For the first time in weeks, I spoke freely, not editing my thoughts for professional decorum or potential judgment. Leo listened with his whole body, his eyes bright with genuine interest. He wasn't assessing me, he was connecting with me. "Seriously, Will, that chair you made for the Finch's holiday home? That was stunning." Chloe showed me the photos. "You've got magic in your hands," Leo said, taking a bite of his burger. "Thanks, Leo. It's honest work. No quarterly reports, just wood that smells good and tells you where it wants to go," I joked. "Exactly. You're lucky. You deal with tangibles. We deal with illusions and expectations," he said, shaking his head dramatically. We spent another 15 minutes trading light-hearted banter. I felt the stiffness melt from my shoulders. Leo's sincerity was a refreshing, cool stream in the desert of my recent emotional landscape. I felt seen, not as Chloe's husband, but as William. It was precisely at the moment when I cracked a particularly dry joke about a client's outlandish custom furniture request, causing Leo to throw his head back in unrestrained laughter, that the moment of collision happened. Leo slapped my shoulder again, not hard, but in a gesture of shared, robust joy. "You're a legend, Will. Absolutely a legend," he exclaimed, pushing himself up. "Right, back into the fray for me. Give Chloe a hug for me. Tell her I'll catch her before we leave." As he turned to leave, I stood up too. We exchanged a final, quick, warm handshake that naturally evolved into a quick, solid half-hug, the kind men who genuinely like each other share, a spontaneous burst of uncomplicated human connection. There was no pretense, no agenda, just simple, heartfelt warmth. And Chloe saw it. My gaze drifted past Leo's retreating back, across the green lawn, directly to the cabana. Chloe was no longer talking. She was standing statue still, her emerald dress and perfect posture now appearing rigid, brittle. The smile she had been aiming at the senior VP, that high-gloss, unwavering professional weapon, had been instantly and violently extinguished. Her face was a study in cold, absolute shock. Her eyes, usually so sharp and calculating, were narrowed, focused on me and Leo with an intensity that could burn. It wasn't the look of a wife witnessing a romantic indiscretion. It was far more chilling. It was the look of a queen who had just witnessed a vassal pledge allegiance to a neighboring kingdom. It was ego, wounded and furious, stripped bare. Her grip on her glass must have been bone white. The emotion flashing in her eyes was not jealousy over affection, but sheer, unadulterated outrage over the loss of control. Her partner, the one she had carefully distanced, the one she had relegated to the polite periphery, was sharing genuine, unscripted warmth, the very currency she had deemed too silly for her public life, with someone else. And she hadn't choreographed it. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of forced pleasantries. Chloe avoided me entirely, her eyes like twin surveillance cameras that occasionally swept my position. The inevitable confrontation arrived 2 hours later, in the claustrophobic, climate-controlled silence of her black sedan, on the drive back to the city. The tension was a living thing, buzzing between the seat belts. What was that? Chloe's voice sliced through the silence like broken glass. It wasn't a question, it was an accusation, delivered with a quiet, lethal precision. I stared out the passenger window, watching the suburban landscape blur. I felt an unexpected calmness. The ghost of the rejected husband was finally ready to speak. "What was what, Chloe?" I asked, my voice measured, steady. "Don't play coy. The whole performance with Leo. The laughing. The hugging. Honestly, William, you looked like a child starving for attention. You made a spectacle." Her voice escalated slightly, betraying the tight leash she kept on her emotions. "We were with the VPs. What message do you think that sends? That you're unprofessional? That you crave validation from anyone? You undermined me." I turned my head slowly, meeting her gaze for the first time since the incident. Her eyes were still burning with that cold, proprietorial anger. "I undermined you," I repeated, letting the words settle. Did I grab his hand under a table while Mr. Finch was speaking? Did I make a joke about the firm's stock portfolio? She gripped the steering wheel tighter. "That's completely irrelevant. It was the display. The overt intimacy." I leaned back, my own voice quiet now, dangerously even. The mask of polite resentment was peeling away, revealing a core of pure, justified hurt. "Intimacy," I echoed, almost tasting the word. "You use that word as if it's a flaw. Tell me, Chloe, why are you so angry about a spontaneous, friendly embrace with Leo, when the same gesture from me, your husband weeks ago, was dismissed as excessive and silly?" She hesitated. The directness of the question, the mirror held up to her own hypocrisy, momentarily stalled her corporate programming. That was different," she stammered, scrambling for footing. "That was at the gala. This was a casual event, but still." "No, it wasn't different," I cut in, my voice low but firm, the sound of a foundation cracking. "The only difference is that I was the one initiating it. When I reach for you, it's a distraction from your ambition. When Leo and I shared a laugh, I was suddenly not focused on you, and that's what truly infuriated you, isn't it? It wasn't about professionalism, Chloe. It was about possession. I fixed her with a hard stare, delivering the final painful thrust. You pushed me away. You told me to stand back. You created the distance. And tonight, when you saw that the warmth you rejected could easily be found elsewhere, you weren't jealous for my love. You were furious that you didn't control my attention anymore. You hated the idea that I could thrive, that I could connect, that I could be happy, without your specific permission and choreography. The car was filled with a silence that screamed. Chloe's face was pale, her jaw working furiously. She couldn't immediately counter because, deep down, she knew I had struck gold. I had found the hidden lever of her wounded ego. "That's a vile thing to say, William," she finally whispered, the anger replaced by a defensive coldness. "Is it? Or is it just the truth that your image control wouldn't allow you to hear?" I sighed, the small victory feeling utterly hollow. "You told me I wasn't allowed to be excessive or domestic in front of people. Fine. I gave you what you wanted. But you failed to realize that the moment you rejected my affection as a weakness, I stopped offering it to you. And that space you carved out for your career? It's now occupied by something else. My self-respect." I turned back to the window. The words hung in the air like a lethal gas. The confrontation was over. I had won the argument, but the cost was the realization that my wife valued my utility and my silence more than my touch. The emotional gap she had opened in Babbitt 1 was now an unbridgeable canyon, and I had just announced my residency on the other side. The stage was set for Babbitt 3, where my newfound detachment would become the ultimate challenge to her self-constructed image. The days following the confrontation in the black sedan were characterized by a chilling reversal of roles. If in the past I was the one reaching out and Chloe was the one retracting, the dynamic was now flipped, stark and undeniable. Chloe, stung not by the depth of my hurt but by the precision of my accusation, that her anger stemmed from possession, not passion, began to exhibit what she likely categorized as corrective behavior. Her efforts were systematic, almost clinically executed. They felt less like acts of spontaneous affection and more like steps in a damage control protocol. It was as if she had conducted a quick, internal audit of my recent grievances and was now checking off the boxes of required spousal behavior. The first change was subtle but significant. We were at a dinner party hosted by one of her subordinates. As we entered the crowded, brightly lit living room, Chloe's hand, usually reserved for an expensive glass of wine or a firm handshake, settled deliberately on the small of my back. It was a firm, possessive touch, meant for external viewing. I could feel the heat of her palm, but the gesture landed on me with the impact of a bureaucratic stamp, proof of ownership, not intimacy. I reacted, or rather, I didn't react. My body remained rigid, my expression politely blank. I was a beautiful, meticulously crafted wooden decoy, silent and unmoving. "You seem quiet tonight, William," she murmured, leaning close, her perfume a familiar, luxurious cloud. "Just absorbing the atmosphere, Chloe," I replied, my eyes scanning the room, carefully avoiding hers. "You know I'm not much for small talk. Especially the kind that's meant to impress." The jab landed squarely, reminding her of her own previous admonishments, but she merely tightened her grip. "Don't be like that. We're here together." "Yes," I agreed softly. "Together, but separate. Just as you prefer." I noticed the subtle flicker of frustration cross her perfect features. My polite indifference was throwing her algorithm off. My silence, which she had once craved for its non-disruptive quality, was now the loudest argument in the room. The attempts escalated at home. She started sitting with me in the evenings, not across the room, but deliberately beside me on the sofa while I reviewed my design sketches. She would lean her head momentarily on my shoulder. "Work is draining today," she announced one night, her voice softer than usual. I kept sketching, my pencil moving with steady, relentless focus on the precise curves of a cabinet leg. "I understand. Global consulting doesn't sound easy." "Aren't you going to offer to rub my shoulders?" she prompted, the question laced with a strange, almost desperate testing quality. I stopped sketching, placed my pencil down precisely on the table, and turned to face her. My eyes were calm, devoid of the longing that used to jump to attention at her slightest request. "Chloe, I would love to," I said, my voice gentle, almost pitying. "But I recall a time, not long ago, when you categorized any spontaneous physical affection from me as a weakness you needed to avoid. I've learned that lesson well. If I touch you now, I want it to be because I'm invited to share warmth, not because I'm obligated to soothe your stress so you can function better tomorrow." She recoiled slightly, not from my words, but from the realization that the fire of my old passion had been banked. She was facing a ghost. The man she had repeatedly rejected was now a polite stranger who refused to let sentimentality breach his newly erected walls. "That's unfair, William," she protested, her voice tightening. "I'm your wife. I need you. Need or convenience?" I asked, picking my pencil back up. "If you genuinely needed me, you wouldn't have been so horrified that I shared a simple, uncomplicated moment of warmth with Leo. You'd have been happy I found a moment of genuine human interaction, since you weren't willing to offer it." She fell silent. She didn't leave the couch, however. She stayed, physically close, yet emotionally miles away. She was trying to re-establish the narrative that she was the one who controlled the flow of affection. She was trying to prove that she could summon the old William back just by clicking her fingers. But the old William was gone, replaced by this new, terrifyingly peaceful version. I had entered a state of detachment. It wasn't born of malice or spite, but of sheer, emotional survival. The constant striving to be enough, to be acceptable to her image, had exhausted me. Now, I felt serene, light, and frighteningly empty. I no longer cared if she held my hand in public. I no longer cared if she spoke of me proudly to her colleagues. All those external metrics, which had once felt so vital, now felt like dust in the wind. The approval I sought was internal, and I had found it in the quiet dignity of my withdrawal. This transformation was the true catalyst for Chloe's growing panic. She began watching me with an intensity she usually reserved for analyzing complex market trends. She was trying to read the cipher of my non-reaction. One evening, she confronted me more directly, her voice laced with desperation. We were in the kitchen, making separate, solitary meals, another symbol of our parallel lives. "You've changed, Will," she said, her back to me as she chopped vegetables with unnecessary force. "Yes, I have," I agreed, not even looking up from my own pot. Is this because of what I said at the gala? That silly thing about the hand-holding?" Her tone was dismissive of the incident itself, minimizing it to a silly thing, thereby minimizing my pain. I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms. My gaze was steady. "No, Chloe. It's not because of that silly thing. It's because of the philosophy behind the silly thing. It's because you made it clear that my primary function is to enhance your professional image, and that spontaneous love is a threat to that image." "But I'm trying now. I'm making an effort," she cried, finally turning, her eyes wide. "I asked you to sit with me. I touched your hand. And how does that touch feel, Chloe?" I challenged gently. "Does it feel like love, or does it feel like damage control? Does it feel like you missed me, or does it feel like you realized you misplaced your favorite accessory?" The question hung heavy, unanswerable. I watched her defensive armor crack under the weight of her own ego. "I need you, William," she repeated, but the words were thin, lacking conviction. I shook my head slowly. "No, you need a husband who doesn't rock the boat. You need the stability I provide so you can launch higher. That's a necessity, not love. And I am tired of being an anchor in your hurricane of ambition. I want to be a partner in a shared harbor." I walked over to her, and for the first time in weeks, I touched her face, my fingers tracing the sharp line of her jaw. It was a touch devoid of desire, only profound, quiet sadness. "You got the distance you wanted, Chloe," I whispered. "That evening at the gala, you carved out a space between us. Now that space is real. It's not just a physical gap between chairs at a dinner. It's a quiet canyon in my heart. I'm not angry anymore. I'm just empty. And empty is a much harder thing to fill than anger." I withdrew my hand. She was looking at me, finally seeing past her own reflection, finally grasping the true magnitude of what she had lost. The fire in my eyes had been replaced by a quiet, snowy expanse. The man who fought for her affection was gone, replaced by a man who had accepted her rules of separation. She was starting to realize that the man she thought she had control over, the one whose love was guaranteed, was now the one thing in her life she couldn't manage, couldn't measure, and couldn't buy back with superficial gestures. Her carefully constructed world, built on external validation, was crumbling because the one person who truly knew her, the one person who saw the human beneath the corporate armor, was letting go. The resolution wasn't reconciliation, it was an acknowledgement of the void. She had achieved her professional distance, but she had failed to account for the terrifying reality of being truly, profoundly alone. The stage was set for her realization that the man she deemed not her standard for a partner was the only one who could see her without judgment. The quiet canyon I had described to Chloe became the landscape of our home. It wasn't a battlefield, but a vast, silent plain where both of us walked alone. My detachment, that quiet, impenetrable shield, was now fully operational, and for Chloe, it was an unforeseen consequence more devastating than any professional setback. She stopped attempting the calculated gestures. The hand on my back, the prompting for a shoulder rub, those actions, driven by wounded ego and a desire to regain control, ceased because they met the cold, hard reality of my emotional withdrawal. She was faced with a truth that no amount of corporate brilliance could spin. The man she took for granted was no longer available for her convenience. Over the next few days, I noticed small, telltale signs of her unraveling. She missed a crucial deadline, something unheard of. She was unusually snappy with her assistant, then immediately regretted it. Her perfect poise was fracturing. She wasn't fighting me anymore. She was fighting the unsettling truth that her ambition had hollowed out her personal life. One morning, I found her not at her sleek desk, but curled up on the living room sofa, staring blankly at the wall. Beside her lay a box of old photographs, usually kept stored away in the attic, artifacts from a life she seemed to have intentionally forgotten. I walked into the kitchen to make coffee, observing her from a safe distance. I was preparing to be William the detached, the polite roommate. She didn't look up, but her voice was small, dry, and brittle, like autumn leaves underfoot. "I found these old photos," I asked, my voice flat, devoid of the familiar nostalgia. She finally looked at me, and her eyes were red-rimmed, devoid of makeup, stripped of the armor she usually wore. This was the first time in months I felt like I was looking at Chloe, the human being, not Chloe, the brand. "Look at this one," she said, her finger hovering over a faded picture. "It's from that ridiculous camping trip 8 years ago. Remember? The tent collapsed, and it poured rain, and we had to sleep in the car." I nodded, the memory vivid but strangely distant. "You cried when the mud ruined your expensive boots." "And you," she whispered, a ghost of a genuine smile touching her lips. "You didn't laugh or tell me to be professional. You just took off your flannel shirt, wiped the mud off, and told me we could buy 100 new pairs, but we only had this one disaster of a night to remember. You made it an adventure." She looked up at me, the years of accumulated distance momentarily collapsing. I remember thinking then, this is the man I want. You didn't care what the world thought of me covered in mud. You only cared about my comfort. I leaned against the doorframe, still maintaining my emotional quarantine. "That man is still here, Chloe. He just stopped showing up when you defined his comfort as a silly, domestic thing." "And I deserved that," she confessed, her voice cracking. "God, I deserved that silence." She picked up another photo, our wedding picture, a picture where our smiles were wide, unguarded, and deeply real. I look at this, and I realize what I traded. I didn't just trade time. I traded authenticity. I was so busy building a perfect exterior based on what they wanted to see, that I dismantled the interior based on what I actually needed. This was different. This wasn't the wounded ego of Babak 2. This was raw, painful self-revelation. "When you were with Leo laughing," she continued, her gaze fixed on the photo, "I didn't feel jealousy for the man he was kissing. I felt this blinding, terrifying rage because that easy, unfiltered happiness was something I was supposed to have with you, and I had foolishly priced it out of my life. I didn't want him to have your warmth. I just realized I had killed the part of you that freely offered it to me." She finally dropped the photographs and looked at me, tears streaming down her face, washing away the last vestiges of the corporate mask. "I called your touch excessive. But in truth, William, it was the only thing that made me feel safe enough to be less than perfect. It was the only standard that mattered. Not the firm's. Not Finch's. Just yours. And I pushed it away because I was scared of needing anything that wasn't controllable." She stood up, her posture finally broken, her shoulders slumped in true defeat, not staged exhaustion. She walked toward me, not with the calculated step of a negotiator, but the halting gait of a wounded person seeking shelter. "I need to say this, not as your wife, but as the scared, image-obsessed woman who ruined us," she whispered, her voice husky with unshed emotion. "The truth is, all those men at the firm, they respected me, they admired my ruthlessness, they saw me as a rival. But you were the only one who saw me, truly saw me, without judgment, and still loved the mess underneath the facade. Your affection wasn't a weakness to avoid. It was the only proof I had that I was worthy of simple, human happiness." She was sobbing now, deep, shuddering sobs that shook her entire frame. This was not the professional breakdown. This was the genuine, torrential downpour that clears the atmosphere. I finally let go of my carefully constructed detachment. The coldness shattered like glass, and the old, deep-seated love for the imperfect woman underneath the perfect suit rushed back in, powerful and undeniable. I saw her vulnerability, a quality she never allowed the world to glimpse, and it was devastatingly beautiful. I stepped forward and gathered her into my arms. This time, my arms were not a cage of polite obligation, but a sanctuary. "Oh, Chloe," I murmured, burying my face in her hair, inhaling the familiar scent that was now mingled with the salty smell of tears. "I love you. I never stopped loving you. I just couldn't survive being constantly rejected by you." "I know," she choked out, holding on to me with a desperate, crushing strength. "I was an idiot. I convinced myself that your gentle nature meant you weren't my standard for a partner. I thought I needed a shark. But I realized that I'm the shark, and I need a port, William. I need your port." We stood there for a long time, the only sound the quiet rhythm of her breathing calming against my chest. The canyon was still there, but now we were standing together at the bottom of it, finally ready to climb out together. The reconciliation wasn't marked by grand gestures, but by quiet, determined steps toward reconnection. She took a month off, forcing herself to delegate, to breathe. We repainted the old, heavy chairs in my workshop, a simple, shared task that required teamwork, not strategy. Our final, public test came 6 months later. It was another firm event, smaller, but still high stakes. Chloe was dressed elegantly, but the energy around her was different, less rigid, more relaxed. I wore a suit, but it felt like a comfortable second skin this time. She was introduced to a new, powerful client, a woman known for her demanding professionalism. As they shook hands, the client's eyes drifted to me standing respectfully beside Chloe. The client said, "And this must be your husband, William. The woodworker, right? I hear your furniture is marvelous." For a heart-stopping second, I waited for the old Chloe, the one who would minimize me, who would classify my work as a quaint hobby to quickly pivot back to business. Instead, Chloe beamed, her eyes shining with genuine, unfeigned pride. She reached out, found my hand, and intertwined her fingers with mine, a firm, non-negotiable grip. "He is," Chloe said, her voice clear and strong, her gaze sweeping the room, defying anyone to judge. "He is William. And you're right, his work is marvelous. It's honest, and it's real. He's the only standard that truly matters to me." She turned her head slightly, her gaze meeting mine, deep, loving, and completely unguarded. It was the same look from the camping photo, the same look from our wedding day. It was the look of a woman who had realized that the man she thought was beneath her standards was the only one who could see the treasure of her soul. We stood there, hand in hand, in the center of a professional world, proving to everyone, and most importantly, to ourselves, that love, warmth, and connection would always trump image and ambition. The distance had been annihilated, replaced by an unbreakable bond built on truth, not pretense. We were finally home.